I'm confident that if Russia were to prevail in Ukraine, you'd see the pressure coming on Finland, coming on Sweden, and I think the Baltic states as well for daring to join NATO, to tell the truth.
Let's talk about NATO. They are on a huge exercise, or in preparation for an enormous exercise right now, with hundreds of army vehicles heading to Germany from Hampshire. There are army armoured vehicles, there are trucks, tractors, support vehicles, and light guns. This exercise, it is NATO's largest, we're told, since the end of the Cold War. We'll see countries prepare for how we could reinforce European allies in nations bordering Russia. This comes as it's revealed that Russia has lost more than 3,000 tanks during its invasion of Ukraine. That is the equivalent of its entire pre-war active inventory. Chris Parry is a former Royal Navy Rear Admiral who's also served as a Director General at the MOD and as a NATO commander. Chris Parry, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Jane.
Very, very simply, what is going on here and how unusual is it?
Well, it's unusual in the sense we've been embroiled in Afghanistan and Iraq for the past 20 years or so. And so we're reverting very much back to the days of the Cold War when we used to have major reinforcement exercises, both to deter Russian aggression, Soviet aggression in those days, and to show that we were capable of conducting exercises and by extension, of course, warfare at this level.
Put very, very simply indeed, the NATO rule is that if a NATO nation is attacked, the rest of NATO comes to its aid. That's it in a nutshell, isn't it?
Well, Article 5 says that the alliance members would consult, but it's been interpreted as meaning that an attack on one is an attack on all, and I think that's how everybody understands it. It was last invoked in the wake of 9/11, and people said, well, actually, it was everybody sort of banding round to support the United States. I'm a bit more skeptical. I think it was also to try and bind the United States to restrain it in what it would do in retaliation for 9/11. But the fact of life is it's a defensive alliance, it's collective security, and everybody from little Estonia all the way up to the United States relies on Article 5 in the event of major aggression from one of the totalitarian powers. Or indeed our interests in the wider world.
Right. And countries like, well, Finland has only just joined NATO, hasn't it, really? And it has an incredibly long border with Russia. It isn't beyond the bounds of possibility, at some point, I imagine, that Russia could invade Finland.
Jane, it's an interesting question because I think without Ukraine happening, I think Finland would probably still be outside NATO. I remember being in Finland probably 5 years ago, and they said to me then, what do you think the prospects of joining NATO are? And I said, well, look, you're really going to upset the Russians if you do that. They've had this long-standing neutrality since, as you know, the Winter War of 1940. And Sweden, of course, has come in, previously neutral. But of course, the war in Ukraine has thoroughly frightened the Finns and the Swedes about Russian intentions. And I'm confident that if Russia were to prevail in Ukraine, you'd see the pressure coming on Finland, coming on Sweden, and I think the Baltic states as well for daring to join NATO, to tell the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening are concerned about this. There's been talk very recently about conscription in this country and about the rather depleted state of our armed forces. Is this concerning? The fact that an exercise of this scale is underway right now, should people be worried?
No, Jen, I don't think people should be worried about the exercise. What they should be worried about is the aggressive intentions of four totalitarian powers. That's Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. They're acting in concert in their own interests in their particular regions. And we're having to face Russia at the moment. I'm one of those people that believes we're in a similar situation to the one that our grandparents faced in the 1930s. We're faced by totalitarian powers who, I'm afraid, mean us harm. They don't like our way of life. They see our way of life being threatening to their regimes, which in turn are actually in quite shaky shape. So in terms of conscription, what the debate actually is about the wrong thing. The debate should be about how we actually mobilize our societies to face the current threat from those totalitarian states, which is going on all the time whether it's cyber, whether it's sort of in counteractions with some of our armed forces or threats to our interests, or it's the route to full-scale confrontation. And we need to be prepared for that. I wrote a book 10 years ago, and I said, the real problem we've got is our potential opponents can see the bottom of our locker in terms of our armaments and in terms of our manpower. We've got to actually say we can reach back into our society, into our industry, and whatever you throw at us, we can deal with that. And I would say we've moved from a position now from deterrence to defense. We've got to demonstrate we can defend ourselves and our interests, or I'm afraid weakness is a provocation to totalitarian powers, as history shows.
But isn't there a danger that we might exaggerate Russia's ability? Because it has really taken some severe knocks in Ukraine, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's a good point, Jane, but I'm afraid that Ukraine is not a generic issue. Russia has vast resources, and I think we have to realize that we're not going to see a massive invasion by Russia if it decides to take on the West. We're going to see missile attacks on our infrastructure and also on our major cities and our various sort of hubs. At the moment, we're involved in small scale, low scale strategic competition. We're seeing it all the time, and that's everything from the Novichok attacks in Salisbury through cyber and quite a lot of provocations in the Baltic and the Black Sea, even now. So that sort of confrontation with Russia will not take the form everybody thinks it is, which is a land invasion like Ukraine. It'll be a major disruption of our way of life. And I've always said that people won't believe that is happening until people see the threat of those missiles that can hit Kiev also being able, which they can, to hit Kent.
Right. Well, you did start, or at least at some point during the interview, Chris, you said we shouldn't worry. I must confess that as we head towards the end of the interview, I am more worried than I was at the start.
Oh,
Or do you just think we should just be realistic about this?
Yeah, Jane, we're just going to be realistic and say, look, we've got these totalitarian powers. Whenever I speak Russian, and also when I look at the literature, they're talking about mobilizing in the face of threats to the regime there. China's doing the same. And one of the current tropes is that Russia is bad weather and China is climate change in relation to the threat. If you look in every one of the four totalitarian powers that I mentioned, their regimes are rocking at the moment for one reason or another. And I know from our experience that totalitarian regimes, when they're starting to rock, they externalize their internal problems. That's the situation we're in today. And we in the West, with our freedoms, our liberties, our prosperity, pose a threat to those regimes. They've got a lot of military power, and the temptation will be there to use it.